My grandson said, "Look under the table." That's when I knew I had to call 911. It was a winter night in New York, the kind where the walls hum with cold and silence has its own weight. From my room, through the thin crack of the door, I heard Beck's voice drift from the living room, sharp, careless, cruel. "She cries at night? Good. Maybe the guilt will kill her faster." He said it as if he were talking about a broken appliance that needed to be thrown away. Then came Susie's laugh, shrill and mean. "She should be thankful we even let her breathe under this roof." They thought I could not hear. They always think that. Old ears, old bones, old mind, that is how they describe me. But I hear everything. Every word that drips like poison into the air of this house that once smelled of my cooking, my flowers, my life. I lay there in the bed they placed in what used to be my study, a room that once held books and memories, now stripped bare, painted sterile white, with a single chair facing the wall. They call it my safety room. The lock is on the outside, the windows are sealed with frost film, and the camera in the corner blinks every few seconds. "For your safety," Susie says. Safety, in her language, means silence. I looked at the ceiling and listened to their laughter fade into the television. It was not anger that filled me. Anger is young, wild, and fast. What filled me was something slower, heavier, a tired kind of sorrow that grows roots in your bones. I was 74, and I had long stopped expecting kindness from people who only know how to count what you cost them. From the hall came the soft steps of my grandson, Louis. He is only 9, small and thin, with the kind of eyes that see everything adults wish they could hide. "Mom?" I heard him whisper. "Why is Grandma's door locked?" Susie's voice was cold. "Because Grandma gets confused, sweetheart. She wanders into places she shouldn't, like other people's lives." Beck added, "Don't argue with your mother, Louis. Go to bed." I turned to the wall and let the silence fold around me like an old blanket. The air smelled faintly of bleach and lemon polish, Susie's scent of control. I traced the shape of the old wallpaper under my fingers and remembered painting that wall myself 40 years ago, when Beck was a boy running through the hall with jam on his fingers and dreams in his eyes. He used to call me Mama Bird. Now he calls me nothing. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I do not sleep much anymore. Nights are long in this house. Sometimes I hear Susie whispering numbers to Beck, account numbers, balances, payments. They forget I am the one who taught Beck how to balance a checkbook, how to keep a house. Now they wait for me to forget. They want me to forget where the papers are, the deeds, the will, the names that matter. They want me small, helpless, and lost. Earlier that evening, Susie brought me my pills. The cup was pink, the same shade as the robe she wears when she pretends to be caring. "Here, Janet. Doctor said to take both before bed." She smiled without her eyes. I asked what they were. "Just vitamins, dear," she said, and left before I could speak again. I did not take them. I have seen too many people drift away under the name of care. When I worked at St. Agnes Hospital, I watched families bring in their elders, promising to check in every week. They rarely did. The patients who survived were the ones who remembered who they were, even when everyone around them called them confused. So I keep a small notebook under my pillow. Every night, I write what I heard, what I saw, what I felt. A nurse's habit that became a weapon against forgetfulness. That night, I wrote. Beck laughed. Susie laughed louder. Louis asked why the door was locked, and then I stopped. Because as I looked at the reflection of the hallway light under my door, I realized something chilling. The shadow that moved back and forth wasn't Louis's small frame, it was Beck's. He stood there for a long minute, maybe listening, maybe making sure I was still awake. I turned off the lamp. The red light from the camera blinked once, twice. I whispered into the darkness, "I built this house. You can lock every door, but you can't own what I remember." The cold pressed harder against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed through the city, echoing like a warning or a promise. I closed my eyes, not to rest, but to plan. Because I knew something in my bones. Cruelty never stays quiet forever. One day, even silence gets tired of hiding. And when that day comes, someone always listens. That night was the first time I realized I wasn't just being forgotten, I was being erased. And erasing me was the first step to taking everything I had left. But they had made one mistake. They forgot that even an old woman remembers how to fight back. I was 28 when Harold died, a heart attack, quick, cruel, and clean. He collapsed in the kitchen with one hand on the counter and the other still holding his coffee cup. Beck was 5, too young to understand what death meant, but old enough to see his mother scream. I didn't have time to grieve. Grief was a luxury I could not afford. Rent was due in 2 weeks, Beck needed shoes for kindergarten, and the landlord had already knocked twice asking about the heating bill. So I went back to work full-time at Street Agnes Mental Health Center. Nights and weekends, day shifts when I could grab them. I took extra patients. I never said no. I became the nurse who always showed up, who never asked questions, who did the work no one else wanted to do. And when Beck got sick, I sold my wedding ring to pay for the antibiotics. He never knew. I told him we lost the ring in a move. I smiled when he asked if he could buy me a new one when he grew up. He said, "A big, shiny one, Mama Bird. Like the Sunday, that boy had the softest heart." At night I would come home, bone-tired, and find little notes on my pillow. "Thank you for the pancakes. You're the best, Mama. I love you more than cartoons." I kept them all. Still have them, tied in a ribbon, in the bottom drawer of a locked box Susie's never found. For 16 years, it was just me and Beck. I worked, I saved, I got promoted to senior nurse. I bought the house on Southwick Lane after working double shifts for 3 straight years. The down payment came from a jar labeled, "Never Beg." Beck didn't know it, but that jar held every birthday gift I refused, every Christmas bonus I declined to spend, every lunch I skipped to put a little more aside. Then came Susie. Beck met her at a conference in Boston. She was working in real estate, ambitious, always dressed like she expected a camera to follow her. The first time he brought her to dinner, I knew something was off. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her questions were calculated. And the way she scanned the living room, it was not admiration, it was assessment. After they left, I said one sentence, just one. "She's the kind of woman who'll love what you own, not who you are." That was the first crack in our bond. The next week, Beck didn't come by. The week after, he canceled our Sunday lunch. A month later, I heard through a co-worker's daughter that he and Susie were engaged. I waited for him to tell me himself. He never did. When I called to congratulate him, he was short, cold. "Thanks, Mom, we're keeping it small." Then he added, "And Susie feels like you judge her." I said, "I only said what I saw, Beck." He snapped, "Maybe you should stop seeing so much." That was the beginning of the distance, the slow unthreading of everything we had stitched together over 2 decades. They married without inviting me. I saw the pictures on social media. Susie in a gown that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, Beck with a forced smile, their hands on a deed to a new condo that I later found out I had helped finance because he used part of the savings I had left him for emergencies. When Louis was born, I thought things might heal. I sent gifts. I offered to babysit. I offered too much, perhaps. Susie declined every time. She said, "We have help." When Louis turned 3, I finally saw him in person, a brief visit under strict timing. Susie spent most of it talking about schools. Beck barely said 2 words to me, and Louis clung to my skirt like he had always known me. That's the only thing that broke me, not the rejection, not the cold, but the tiny hand that held mine like it had never let go. Still, I stayed away. I did not beg. I did not push. I waited. Then I had a fall. Nothing major, but enough for the doctor to recommend short-term assistance. Susie came to the hospital with Beck. She smiled like a fox in pearls. "You should move in with us, Janet. It's time you had some support." I hesitated, but Beck said, "Mom, please, you'll be safer." And I, still wanting to believe my boy was in there, somewhere, I agreed. It was only later I learned the support meant locking my door at night, meant rationing my food, my medicine, meant my room would have no latch from the inside, meant I would become a ghost in a house I helped them build. Susie had whispered to Beck for years, "Your mother never respected your choices." But I did. I respected him enough to tell the truth. And because of that, I became the villain in his version of the story. He used to say he wanted freedom. He left my house at 18, swearing he'd never be controlled. Now he locks the door on his own mother. I used to think he was running from pain. Now I see he was running toward power. He tells people, "I am confused, that I have episodes, that I do not remember what day it is." Yet I hold on to what is mine, my mind, my truth, my memories. I remember the smell of bleach in Susie's perfume. I remember the sound of my name being dropped from their dinner conversations. I remember Beck's voice, low and certain, saying to someone on the phone, "She's fading fast. It won't be long." They think I am fading. But I am not. I am waiting, watching, writing. Because if they want to rewrite who I am, if they want to erase the woman who raised Beck Harlow out of nothing, then they have another thing coming. I raised him from dust. He returned the favor by burying me in silence. I once saved him from poverty. Now he saves me from freedom. They called it my resting room. A nice name, a soft lie. It was 12 by 12 feet, with one window that did not open and a door that locked from the outside. The carpet was beige. The walls were white, cold, and blank. No pictures, no calendar, no clock. A single bed, a narrow dresser, and a chair that faced nothing but the wall. That was my new world. There was a tiny blinking camera in the upper corner, wrapped in a white plastic dome. "It's just a fall monitor," Susie said with her usual grin. "Safety first, right, Janet?" What she meant was, "We want to watch you." What she meant was, "We do not trust you not to embarrass us." The first few days, I tried to keep a routine. I made my bed neatly. I folded my nightgown under the pillow. I drank the water they brought. I took the pills at first. But the second week, I began to feel dizzy after every dose. Not tired, not sleepy, just unsteady, like I was walking on a floor that moved. I asked Susie what the pills were. "It's just your regular meds, sweetie," she said. "Too sweet, too fast. Doctor said you should take them with food." She never told me the doctor's name. When I insisted, she sighed. "Janet, we're only trying to help you feel better. You haven't been yourself lately." I wanted to scream, "What self?" But I didn't, because I knew the moment I raised my voice, they would call it an episode. Everything I did could be twisted into evidence that I was unwell. That was the trick. They did not hit, they did not yell, they erased me with kindness. I found the pill bottle in the trash one morning when I was taking out tissues. It had 2 stickers on it. One was mine from my actual prescription for blood pressure. The other was newer, half peeled, covering the dosage. When I rubbed it off, I saw a different name underneath one I recognized from my nursing days. A sedative, low dose, long term, meant for severe anxiety, sometimes used for dementia. I flushed the next dose down the toilet. That afternoon, Susie came in with her iPad and a stack of papers. "Janet, we've been talking. Beck and I just want to make sure everything's in order, legally. We need your signature on this form. It's a standard care agreement. Just says you consent to live here with us and receive help." I asked to read it in full. She hesitated, then handed me the pages. I scanned quickly, careful not to show how fast my brain still worked. Near the bottom, buried in paragraph 5, I saw the words, "Power of attorney transfer, financial and medical authority, full guardianship designation." I looked up and said, "I need time." Susie's smile froze. "Of course," she said, standing up too quickly. "Take all the time you need. But we'd really appreciate it if we could wrap this up by the end of the week. For the family." She left the papers on my nightstand like a ticking bomb. I locked the door behind her only to realize, once again, there was no lock on the inside. Just a smooth, round knob. My privacy was a performance. My autonomy, an illusion. When I tried to call Ruth, my old friend from the hospital, the phone rang once, then stopped. The house line was monitored. My cell phone, they said, was too complicated for me, and they had misplaced the charger. I knew that meant it was gone. Even my mail was open before it reached me. I tested it one day by writing myself a letter and leaving it with Louis to post. It never came back. I asked Beck, and he said, "Mom, you probably just forgot. Are you okay?" That became his line for everything. Are you okay? Not out of care, but as a warning, a test. If I said no, he would log it. If I said yes, he would tell Susie I was still manageable. One morning, I asked where my wedding album was. Susie blinked. We had to put it in storage. Too much clutter in here. Clutter. My memories. My life. Later that day, I saw a label on my bedroom key hanging from a nail in the kitchen. It read in perfect handwriting, "Safety, Grandma," like I was a toddler or a pet, as if keeping me locked up was a loving act. I asked why the lock was on the outside. Susie said, "It's to keep you safe, in case you get confused and wander. You wouldn't want to fall down the stairs again, would you?" I had never fallen down any stairs. I wanted to rage. I wanted to throw something, but I knew what would happen if I did. Susie would film it. Beck would say, "This is exactly what we were worried about." And then they'd call the doctor with the forged records. So I smiled. That night, I pulled out the small notebook I had smuggled into my sock drawer. "A nurse's habit," I wrote. "They are building a case. Every kindness has a price tag. Every favor is a chain. Do not forget who you are." On the next page, I drew a floor plan of the house, marked the cameras, marked the times Susie entered with the tray, noted when she checked my pills, when she left the hallway light on, when Beck stood outside and whispered to someone on the phone. I may not have a phone, but I still have a brain. And my brain remembers everything. Louis came to my door one afternoon and slipped a drawing under the crack. It was me, sitting in the chair by the window. He had drawn me smiling. In the corner he wrote, "Grandma sees everything." I pressed the picture to my heart and didn't cry. Not then. Susie walked by moments later and picked it up. "Aw, so sweet," she said, but her mouth tightened. She didn't like that Louis still loved me, that he still saw me as something more than a task. The next day, she told him not to leave drawings anymore. Said it was disruptive. What they didn't know, what they never guessed, was that I had already started to build my own case. Slowly, silently. Like every woman who has ever been underestimated, I gathered, I recorded, I remembered. They thought they were clever, that by taking away my freedom, they'd take away my will. But I had lived too long, loved too hard, and lost too much to give up now. I was not fading. I was waiting, because sooner or later, all cages rust, and when they crack, the light gets in, and when it does, no amount of locks can keep the truth from flying out. There are whispers in this house that do not belong to love. They slither through the vents and the cracks beneath doors. They do not know I still hear them. One morning, I was half awake, listening to the sound of Louis brushing his teeth down the hall, when Beck's voice floated in from the kitchen. He was on the phone, his office voice, calm and hushed. I leaned toward the door without making a sound. "Once the papers are done, the house is ours," he said. A pause. "She's losing it anyway." My heart did not drop. Not anymore. At some point, it just settled deeper into my chest like a stone. They were waiting for me to crumble. And they were building the story ahead of time, painting me mad in soft strokes, so that when I fell, no one would ask why. I tried to tell my neighbor once, Helen, who used to bring me rhubarb pie when she saw me in the garden. I caught her while I was being taken on a supervised walk to the mailbox. "Something's wrong," I whispered. But Susie cut me off, laughing too loud. "Oh, Janet's been so forgetful lately. She asked me yesterday what year it was. Poor thing." Helen's smile flickered, but only for a second. She patted my shoulder and said, "You let them take care of you now. You deserve to rest." And just like that, I disappeared a little more. In their story, I was the fragile matriarch slowly unraveling, not the prisoner watching the clock. Only Louis saw me. Only Louis believed I was still whole. He would sneak in bits of cookies, tiny slips of folded paper with his childish scrawl. "Don't be sad, Grandma. You're the smartest person I know. I think Mommy and Daddy are lying. That one. I burned. Not because it hurt, but because I knew if they found it, they'd twist it into something else. Delusional influence, they'd call it. Projection, I'd seen the terms before. I had written them in files for patients who truly had lost their grip on what was real. But I hadn't. I still knew what year it was. I still remembered the phone number of my best friend in 8th grade. I still remembered the sound Beck made when he cried as a boy, like he was holding in a storm and afraid to let it out. They wanted me to forget all that, because memory is the last thing you can take from someone before they become a shadow. That night, I didn't sleep. I heard Beck's footsteps near my door, his weight shifting. I held my breath. Then his voice, soft and sharp. The sooner she's declared unfit, the sooner we can move. Move. They wanted to sell the house. The house Harold and I built together. The house I paid for, month by month, year by year, through double shifts and weekend overtimes. The house that held Louis's first steps and Beck's graduation photos and the smell of my mother's cinnamon rolls baked every December. And now I was the one in the way. They were not just pushing me out, they were pushing me out of my own life. So I began to write. Every night, after Susie left her tray and Beck checked the locks, I pulled out my notebook. The one with the loose spine and the torn corner where Louis had doodled a Sunday. I wrote everything. The date, the time, what was said, what wasn't, how many pills were on the tray, how many disappeared. I wrote about the documents they showed me, about the way Susie's hands trembled slightly when I asked questions she wasn't expecting. I wrote about the visitor log being empty, even though I had seen delivery men come and go. I wrote about the camera blinking faster after I flushed the pills instead of swallowing them. Write it down, I told myself. Write it all down so they cannot erase you. One night, Louis came to my door after bedtime. He stood very still, looking around, then slipped a folded napkin under the crack. I waited until I knew he was gone, then opened it. It said, "They say you are sick, but I don't believe them. I know you are watching. I am watching too." My hands shook as I folded the note back. Not from fear, from hope. He was only 9, but he saw what grown-ups chose to ignore. I put the napkin in my pillowcase and whispered a silent promise into the dark. I will not vanish, not for them, not for you. Some nights, I felt the fear creep up my spine like frost. What if I died here? What if they succeeded? But then, I would pick up my pen. I would hold it like a sword. I was not helpless. I was recording. Because I knew this house had secrets. And secrets, when written carefully, have a way of turning into truth. Dinner was quiet that evening. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that only grows in places where love has long gone stale. The silverware clinked, the wine glasses tapped, and Susie laughed too loud at something on her phone. Beck scrolled through emails. Louis sat beside me, pushing peas across his plate like he was drawing a map to somewhere else. Then, without looking up, he reached under the table and tugged at my sleeve. I glanced down. His face was pale, eyes wide, not scared, but serious. Braver than any child should need to be. "Grandma," he whispered, barely audible. "Look under the table in Daddy's office, but don't tell them I told you." I nodded once, slowly. And for the rest of the meal, I did not taste a single bite. When night came, I waited. Waited for the lights to go out, for Susie to finish her wine and retreat to her bath, for Beck to turn off the television and make his nightly sweep of the house, checking locks he thought only he held the keys to. I sat in my bed, fully dressed, notebook pressed to my chest like armor. When the hallway fell still, I opened my door without a sound and moved through the dark like a memory. Beck's office was always locked, but I had found the spare key 3 weeks ago, taped behind the utility panel in the laundry room. A hiding place I had taught Beck myself when he was 12 and wanted to keep birthday presents secret. I opened the door slowly. The room smelled like burnt coffee and new carpet. His desk sat like a fortress in the middle, gleaming, cluttered, cold. I crouched low and peered under. There, tucked against the back leg, was a thick spiral-bound notebook and a small black USB drive wrapped in a tissue. My hands trembled as I reached for them. The notebook was Louis'. Inside were pages of crayon drawings, some sweet, some terrifying. Me, sitting in a chair, mouth taped shut. Me, in a bed, with wires on my head and people in white coats watching. Me, crying. Beck and Susie stood beside me in every image, smiling, like they were proud of what they had done. On one page, in messy red crayon letters, Louis had written, "Mommy says Grandma will sleep forever soon." My legs nearly gave out. I sat there on the office floor, gripping the notebook, the USB in my palm, as if it might disappear if I blinked. They were planning something permanent. And Louis knew. Back in my room, I shut the door quietly, pulled the old laptop from its hiding place under my mattress, an outdated thing I had smuggled in months ago when Beck wasn't looking. I plugged in the USB. The screen flickered. A folder appeared, unlabeled. Inside were 6 video files. The dates were recent. I clicked the first. The footage was grainy, taken from a stationary camera, probably the one mounted in the hallway, angled just right to catch my door. Susie sat beside me on a couch. Beck stood behind her. Susie was speaking softly. "Come on, Janet, just take the pills, we talked about this." My voice worn, weak, but clear answered, "I don't know what's in them." Beck snapped. "She's paranoid again." Then the camera cut. The next clip was worse. A man in a white coat, a psychologist I had never met, sat across from me. Beck and Susie flanked him like guards. Susie said, "She's been hallucinating, talking to people who aren't there. She keeps saying she's being watched." "She covered the camera with a scarf last week," Beck added. "We had to take it down." The doctor scribbled something. How often does she forget names? Later, I'd learn he wasn't a licensed psychologist at all, just a disgraced man they found through a back-channel forum, stripped of credentials but hungry for pay. "All the time," Susie said smoothly. "She called Louis Harold last night. That's her dead husband." Lies. Every word. And I saw myself on screen, tired, quiet, not confused but trapped. And yet the doctor nodded as if everything made sense. They were building a file, a case, a fake diagnosis to get me institutionalized. Because if I was declared mentally unfit, everything I owned, everything I had fought for would fall into their hands. I watched all 6 videos. My heart pounded harder with each. But the last clip, that was the one that broke me. Beck was in his office, alone, on the phone. "She doesn't even remember Harold's been dead for 10 years, he said. "We're filing the paperwork next week. Once the death certificate clears, we're home free." Death certificate? I paused, rewound. Yes, he had said it clearly. Once the death certificate clears. But I was not dead. Not yet. I went back to the desk and opened the drawer. I had seen paperwork in there before, but never had the nerve to look. Inside, stacked neatly in a folder labeled "Long-Term Planning," was a copy of my will altered, pages forged, signatures mimicked but wrong. And then, stapled to the back, was something that made the blood drain from my face. A death certificate. My name, my date of birth, listed as deceased. Date of death. 3 weeks from now. I realized with a shock. Due to a legal oversight, Harold's name had never been legally removed from the deed. I had assumed grief and paperwork would settle it. But they left it there, a loophole waiting to be used. My hand shook as I read it again. The form wasn't finalized, not yet, but it had been submitted. They were faking my death. And then I saw something even stranger. The property deed for the house still in my name, and next to mine, a second name. Harold. My husband. Dead a decade, but still legally co-owner of the house. I had never filed the removal. Grief had frozen those papers in a drawer, forgotten until now. That clerical oversight was now my unexpected ally. They had never finalized the removal, which meant they could not legally transfer ownership without my consent or his. That was the loophole. They were trying to erase me so they could forge his consent too. Every brick of the plan came into focus. Drug me, commit me, fake my death, claim the house. And then, freedom for them. A clean escape. And for me? A locked room in a mental facility. Or worse. They were not just cruel. They were clever, but not clever enough, because they had forgotten who I was. I had walked halls with people far more dangerous than Beck. I had managed patients with true madness, not this manufactured paper trail of lies. They thought I was weak, but they had handed me everything I needed: the notebook, the USB, the forged files. And Louis, my brave boy, he had given me a lifeline. And now, it was my turn to fight for both of us. The human mind is resilient, but only until you start doubting your own memory. That is the first step in breaking someone, make them unsure of their past, their truth, their self. That was their strategy. One morning, after I had reviewed the videos on the USB for the third time, I found a new picture in the dresser drawer, one I hadn't seen before. It was of Harold and me on our porch. Or so I thought. Something about it was wrong. Harold's arm looked too stiff. My face was sharper than I remembered. The shadows under our feet pointed in opposite directions. A bad Photoshop job. They had printed and framed a forged memory. I searched the room again. A second photo sat by the window, this one of Beck and Louis at the lake, but Louis's shirt had the wrong year printed on it, one he couldn't have worn because he hadn't been born yet. They were planting false memories like seeds, and if I started to believe them, the garden would grow until nothing real remained. In another video I hadn't opened before, the psychologist leaned forward and said, "She keeps mentioning her husband. That's dementia. Classic fixation on the deceased." The psychologist in the video wasn't listed in any medical registry. I checked later. He had been disbarred years ago. They had hired a failed quack to validate their lie. But I was not fixating. I was remembering. There is a difference. The difference is that when someone is gaslighting you, remembering becomes an act of rebellion. I began to write everything twice. Once in my notebook, once on scraps hidden in places they would never look, inside the vent, beneath the lining of my pillow, between the back of the picture frame and the photo. But I needed help. There was only one person I could trust: Ruth. We trained together at Street Agnes. She had been my mentor and my friend, my sister in every way but blood. She retired 5 years ago and lived out by Lake Geneva, in a quiet house with a vegetable garden and a porch swing. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since they started supervising my calls. But Ruth still owed me a favor. I packed the USB, Louis's drawings, and a photocopy of the forged death certificate into a plain envelope. I labeled it as a recipe exchange, nothing too suspicious, and asked Louis to slip it into Susie's outgoing mail tray. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. 2 nights later, Beck stormed into my room without knocking. The drawer was open. The USB was gone. He didn't say a word at first, just stared at me, lips tight, face pale. Then he stepped forward and slammed the drawer shut with a crack that made me jump. "Where is it?" he asked. "I don't know what you mean," I answered, calm as breath. He slapped the wall. "Don't play with me, Mom." "I don't play," I said. "Not anymore." The next morning, my breakfast never came, nor did lunch, nor dinner. For 3 days, they left me locked in that room with nothing but a bottle of water and a single apple that browned within hours. I heard them moving outside, laughing at night. Once, I heard Susie say through the door, not even trying to whisper, "You should have let me live my life, Mom. Now you'll die in mine." I lay in bed, counting ceiling tiles, rationing sips of water, clutching Harold's picture even though I knew it was fake. Because even a fake memory can give you strength when you have nothing left. On the 3rd day, my legs gave out. I stood, and then I wasn't standing anymore. The floor came fast. My chin hit something hard. I heard a snap. Darkness came, and with it, peace. But I was not gone. Not yet. When I opened my eyes, Ruth was there. Real, solid, fierce. She sat in the chair beside me in a nurse's uniform, not for work, but for war. "Don't talk," she said softly. "Save your strength. They're on their way." I blinked. She smiled. "You were always the clever one, Janet. You trained me well." She held up her phone. A list of emails, scans of every document I'd sent. She'd already forwarded them to the State Health Board, Elder Abuse Division, local police, and her own private lawyer. "They tried to erase you," she said, squeezing my hand. But they forgot you built the system they tried to use. That was the twist they didn't see coming. Because I had once been the woman behind the intake desk. I had written care protocols. I had reviewed patient files. I knew the margins where people slip through. I also knew how to close those margins so the truth could not leak out or be drowned. Beck had copied the right signatures but used the wrong codes. Susie had forged the psychologist's name but filed the papers on a federal holiday. They had faked the wrong type of consent form hospital, not long-term care. And they had ignored the one rule every good nurse learns. Never underestimate the patient, especially not one who taught you how to fight. As I lay there, weak but still alive, I listened to the sound of Ruth's voice, steady and low. "You're safe now," she said. "They think silence wins. But you? You made silence scream." Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Justice was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one locked behind a door. I lay so still I might have been dead. My body trembled, but my voice stayed quiet, flat, soft, the kind used by someone who has endured too much to scream. The small camera I installed behind the wall clock blinked its red eye. It had recorded every whisper, every step, every lie. Tonight, it would record redemption. They must have gotten word. I had seen Beck and Susie in the hallway, huddled in shadows, whispering with harsh gutturals. I heard the sirens in the distance, faint at first, growing louder. The moment had come. The door burst open. Beck stormed in, face contorted, fists clenched. In his hand he held a stack of papers and a briefcase. He lunged toward the desk, fingers curling around my scattered documents. The notebook, the USB, my scribbled evidence. He yanked the files and shoved them toward the drawer's back, as though hiding them would erase guilt. He froze when he saw me lying there, frail but alert. "Please, don't hurt me again," I said, voice cracking, though I meant every word. I knew that my weakness would bait his arrogance. He took a step closer, jaw tightening. "You're already declared dead on paper, old witch," he spat, teeth bared in hate. "You're dead, Janet Harlow, and soon you'll lie in the ground pretending to be nothing." His words were a blade attempting to cut me down, but I was long used to bleeding in silence. Across the room, the mini-camera angled at the door continued its monotonous blinking. It recorded the entire scene. Beck's raging face, Susie's figure in the doorway, Louis trembling behind her ankles, and me, weak but burning inside with clarity. He lunged to destroy the evidence. I stayed still, letting him do it, letting him believe he was winning. It was all part of the plan. As he yanked papers, I whispered, soft enough only for the camera or me to hear. "That's not a ghost you're hearing. That's justice." He froze again. The sound of metal hinges and footsteps heavy, authoritative echoed down the hallway. Beck glanced at the window, saw the lights of red and blue flashing faintly. The door banged open. Several officers flooded in, badges glinting. Beck suddenly realized the trap. He dropped the briefcase. His eyes went wide with panic. "Get him!" someone shouted. 2 officers reached for his arms. He screamed, "I'll finish her myself. Don't you dare touch me." He lunged toward me too slow, too angry, too exposed. They tackled him to the floor before he even got halfway across the room. 1 officer cuffed him. Another retrieved the hidden USB and notebook, flipping through pages as Beck thrashed. Susie shrieked. She stood frozen, eyes glassy, hands trembling. Louis clutched her skirt. "Susie," I said, voice calm now, stronger than I had felt in years. I sat up, using the wall to push myself. The room smelled of sweat, fear, and fluorescent lights. I looked her straight in the eyes. "I just wanted to be free," she sobbed, voice small. Her lips trembled. She looked away. She covered her face with trembling hands. I reached out, though I would not touch her. I said, "You chained yourself with hate, Susie. Freedom isn't what you think." The officers backed off, standing between us. She gasped, tears falling. Beck lay on the floor, cuffed, staring at the ceiling, defeated. One of the officers, female, firm, moved to me. "Miss Harlow, are you okay?" I nodded. In the corner, Louis pressed into the doorway, eyes wild and afraid. I called softly, "Louis, come here." He came, trembling. I hugged him close. "It's over now." Behind me, Susie sank to her knees, sobbing. Beck glared at me like he wanted to kill me with his gaze, but he could not, because his lies were laid bare, because the camera caught it all, because the records, the videos, the evidence, they were undeniable. Out in the hall, more officers cuffed Susie too, dragging her to her feet. A lawyer they had previously contacted hovered by the door. He motioned, "We'll handle it legally, Miss Harlow." I nodded. Beck tried to speak through gritted teeth. "You'll regret this," but an officer snapped, "Not tonight." One of the detectives approached me gently. "Mrs. Harlow, we have your name on the death certificate, your signed paperwork. We'll sort it all." I smiled, no bitterness, just relief. I let Louis slip from my arms and stand beside me. He looked at Beck and Susie, his face small but fierce. He whispered, "I knew." Later, as they escorted Susie away, she paused, looked back over her shoulder at me and Louis. Her voice broke. "I just wanted to be free," she said again, quieter. I stood in the doorway, sunlight slanting in across the floorboards, and I said, "You chained yourself with hate, Susie. Freedom isn't what you think." Beck was led out in cuffs. Susie followed, crying. Louis took my hand. I held him close, whispering, "You saved me, child. You saved us." We watched them go. I breathed in deeply. The air tasted of cold justice and new beginnings. The room that had felt like a cage now hummed with possibility. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was sacred. That night, I sat by the window, Louis beside me, and I closed my eyes not to sleep, but to remember, to feel alive again. We did not need loud confessions or violent acts. We needed truth. And tonight, truth stood in my room, victorious. It did not happen all at once. Justice never does. It moves slow, like honey in winter, thick, resistant, but inevitable if you give it time. The investigation took months, but the evidence Ruth had collected, the USB, the forged documents, the video recordings from the clock camera, all of it painted a picture no one could deny. Beck was charged with elder abuse, attempted fraud, falsifying legal documents, and conspiracy to commit medical malpractice. When the judge read the charges aloud, I sat in the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap, my back straight. He showed no remorse. He sat there like a man still convinced he'd been wronged. But the jury did not see a misunderstood son. They saw a manipulator, a liar, a man willing to erase a life for property. 18 years in state prison. Susie, on the other hand, wept. She sobbed so hard at sentencing that her shoulders shook. She begged the judge for mercy for Louis, for her reputation, for her past. But the court saw through her tears. She lost custody of Louis and was ordered into mandatory psychiatric evaluation and long-term therapy. Coercive psychological abuse, the report said. Negligent endangerment of a child. The therapist who had written my fake evaluation lost his license. He never showed his face again, though I was told he had vanished to Arizona. The house, my house, was restored under my name. The title now bore only one line. Janet Harlow. No Harold. No Beck. Just me. I did not celebrate. Not in the way people expect. There was no party, no cake, just the quiet click of the mailbox latch when the papers arrived, the seal of the county clerk glinting in the afternoon Sunday. Louis came to live with me a week after the trial ended. At first, he was quiet. He didn't speak much. He spent his mornings sketching in his notebook now, filled with drawings of trees, birds, a porch with a swing. He slept with the light on for weeks. But in time, his laughter returned. He asked me to teach him how to make cinnamon rolls like I used to. He asked about Harold, and I told him, not just the facts, the stories. The way Harold used to whistle when he was nervous. The way he'd fall asleep mid-sentence on the couch and swear he had just been resting his eyes. Louis listened, and one day, he said, "I want to remember everything too." We started a new notebook together. We called it Truths That Matter. It was our way of keeping the past real and the future honest. 2 years passed. Seasons rolled by like pages in a book. Then, One fall morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address, handwritten, shaky. I recognized the name before I opened it. It was from Dr. Lionel Shore, the psychologist who had evaluated me. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a short confession. They paid me to fake your evaluation. I couldn't live with it, I testified. I am sorry. I hope you can forgive a coward who chose the wrong side, then finally chose the right one late, but loud. There was no signature, just the word Lionel, scribbled in small, apologetic ink. I sat down in my chair by the porch and folded the letter slowly. The wind picked up. Leaves fell. Somewhere, a bird sang. I looked out across the lawn, where Louis was chasing shadows, pretending to be a knight. The sword in his hand was a stick, his helmet a plastic bowl, but his heart was unbreakable. I turned my face to the sky and whispered, "You see, Harold, evil never screams, it whispers. It whispers in dinner conversations, in forged signatures, in late-night mutterings behind doors. But truth? Truth does not need to shout. It just needs to be heard." I still keep my journal by the nightstand. Some nights, I add new pages. Others, I simply run my fingers across the old ones, reminding myself of everything I survived. And every Sunday, Louis and I sit on the porch. We drink lemonade, we laugh, we read from our Truths That Matter notebook. One day, he asked, "Grandma, do you hate them?" I looked into his eyes, wide and earnest. I thought about it. "I don't know if hate is the word," I said, "but I remember what they did, and I choose not to let it define me." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. We sat a while longer in silence. Then he said, "You know, they tried to get rid of you, but you didn't go." "No," I said with a small smile. "They tried to write my ending." I leaned back in the chair, the sun warm against my skin, the wind soft against my cheeks. But I rewrote the whole story. And oh, what a story it turned out to be. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stirred something in you, if you believe that truth, even whispered, still matters, then stay with me. There are more stories where this came from. Stories of silence turned to strength, of betrayal turned to justice, of women who were forgotten until they spoke. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more true, powerful stories told from the front porch of memory. Your support keeps these voices alive and reminds the world. Revenge has no expiration date. Wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers. And when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll be back with another soon.